All right, check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Can everybody hear me? Check, 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 check. All right, Michael says we're good, so I'll take it. All right, looks like a couple more people joined in, so that's cool. Hopefully, a few more get in here once we get going. Um, I'll start recording here in a second, but just to kind of give the few of you that are in here a little bit of a rundown of what I want to do with this episode. I'm going to start out segment 1 talking Cannons and Atlas making the playoffs this past weekend, clinching the playoffs, I guess I should say, this past weekend. So we'll talk about that, kind of give my assessment of that. Segment 2 of the show, typically I try to do segments about 10 or so minutes long. Usually do a couple segments each episode. So segment 2, I want to kind of dive back into very quickly. I don't want to kind of beat a dead horse with this if you guys have listened to the past few episodes, but do want to talk at least for like maybe 2-3 minutes about the Redwoods games this weekend, kind of touch on that. And again, kind of give my thoughts on that. And as well as with anything that I do here on this recording, definitely want to get your guys' thoughts in there as well, because then that'll go into the recording as well. So definitely hit me up here in the live chat, and I'll try to get to as many of your comments as I can. But the other thing I want to do with segment 2 is just something that I've seen the last few days, but it's kind of been ongoing the past few years, was this kind of PLL versus NLL thing, and kind of why at this stage in the game that's still a thing, and maybe kind of get some of your thoughts on how that we can move past that, I guess I would say. So that'll kind of be what segment 2 is primarily going to be. And then segment 3, we're going to finish off doing some Athletes Unlimited women's pro lacrosse. I'm a big fan of Athletes Unlimited. I had Tari Kandamiri on about 2 weeks ago now, talking to her about that. We kind of nerded out that episode about it, so I definitely want to touch on that just to finish out the show. But that is basically the rundown. There will be some audio the first 30 seconds or so once I start recording that I don't believe you guys on the live stream will be able to hear. So once that's done, then I'll kind of jump into the episode and we'll get going. But with that, let's do it. And of course, the video doesn't want to play all of a sudden, so I guess we'll just skip it.
All right, here we go. What's up, guys? Welcome into Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. And on this episode, we're going to talk the Atlas and Cannons clinching the postseason this past weekend. In segment two, we're going to get to a couple things quickly. I want to get to kind of a recap of the Redwoods this past weekend and kind of the chance that they missed this weekend as they had their two home games this past weekend. But again, I kind of want to touch very quickly on that. I don't necessarily want to beat a dead horse on that topic, but really what I want to get into with that segment in particular is this kind of NLL versus PLL thing and really why that still exists and maybe what can be done to maybe move past that. And there was something that I saw on Twitter earlier today that I'll get to with that segment because I thought it was actually kind of funny. So we'll touch on that in segment two. And then segment three, we'll finish out talking some Athletes Unlimited week three. I'll give you a kind of a week three breakdown as their third week of the season gets going here on Thursday. Also kind of recap a little bit of their week two from this past weekend, but mostly kind of a look ahead at week three with that. The audio that you heard, though, if you're listening anywhere you get your podcast, the audio that you heard to open the show was Carolina Chaos head coach Andy Towers kind of giving his opening statement to his post-game press conference from over the weekend, kind of giving his assessment of their game against the Redwoods from Saturday. And it seemed like he felt pretty positively, at least in his opening statements, about their performance in that game. But I think at the end of the day, you were still kind of that team. You were that team that lost to the Redwoods when they've kind of been down this season. Obviously, their record going into the weekend, and their score differential being what it was, and again, like I said, I'll talk about the Redwoods a little bit in segment two and kind of that missed opportunity, as I mentioned. But that was just the audio that you heard to open the show. And also make sure to follow me on YouTube here for those of you watching this recording of the episode on YouTube Live. Welcome in, first of all, but you can follow me on YouTube and Twitter at Stevie Mac Media on both places. You can also follow the show Taking the Field with Stevie Mac on Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, Amazon Music, and a couple other places as well, basically anywhere you get your podcast. But to start out the show, to finally dive into this episode, I had to do a couple of housekeeping things there real quick. But to dive into this episode and the Atlas and Cannons clinching over the weekend, I still think that for me, the Atlas are my favorite to win the championship this season. I think that the Cannons aren't that far behind, as we can tell by the conference and league standings. I think they're pretty much like 1-1A right now, but I do still have the Cannons as my favorite in that regard. But the Cannons were a team that preseason I was actually pretty high on, and I think that I touched a little bit on it at the beginning of the season here on the podcast. But they were definitely a team that preseason I was pretty high on going in, because when you look at this year's Cannons team and you compare it to maybe last year's Archers team that won the championship a year ago, I feel like you could make some similarities between those two teams. You talk about in the goal, you've got two really talented young goalies that are capable of winning you a lot of games, as they've done so far for their respective teams, and really could put you in a championship position as Dobson did a year ago, and as I think Kirst can do this year for the Cannons. You talk about last year, the veterans on defense that the Archers had. I think that the Cannons have that similar situation with some of the veterans like Epple that they have this year on their defense. And then both offenses are really solid. I know talking to Cannons beat writer Sarah Griffin a couple episodes ago mentioned that their shooting percentage isn't very good, or at least at the time it wasn't very good. But I still think that their offense is super loaded with talent and with shooters. And you look at a guy like Matt Campbell and his ability to stretch the field from two so far this year, and that attack that they have with Holman and Nolting. They added Will Manny to that group just a couple weeks ago. So just the depth that they have on offense, and it's been well established. The the offensive firepower that the Archers have had the last several years in the PLL. So again, I think you can make a lot of maybe similarities between that Archers team a year ago and the Cannons team this year. And that's a big reason why I liked them preseason as one of the favorites to win the championship this year. And I think that they're in a really solid position to do so. And then looking at the Atlas game against the Water Dogs, I didn't get to catch the game live, but I went back and caught it on replay a little bit later on that same day. And I think the defense looked really good. And you look in that second half, they almost up until that 30-second mark of the final score, they held the Water Dogs scoreless, gave up that two-pointer right at the end otherwise, but that's a really good offense that you held scoreless for virtually the entire second half of that game. And of course, Liam Ettenman was a big reason why, making 17 saves overall. And I think that the offense did what they are best at, and that's getting everybody involved. And I think that primarily, to me, there was two main reasons that the Water Dogs were able to stay in that game, even though they only lost by one. There was two main reasons that I think they were able to have a chance there at the end. And that's the two-pointers that they had. They hit three, I believe it was, in that game against the Atlas, and also the job that Matt DeLuca did in replacing Dylan Ward. He as well, along with Ettenman on the other side, both made 17 saves in that game. So I think when you kind of couple those two things together, it allowed the Water Dogs to stay in a game that, again, they went virtually the entire second half without scoring. And I think there, the last few minutes of the game, the thing that I was most frustrated about with the Atlas in that performance was those last few minutes, those last few possessions that they had, because it really felt like they just had opportunity after opportunity to get one more score and put the Water Dogs away. And they just didn't seem like they were really interested in doing that. They kind of went more the route of just trying to run out the clock. And then you see at the end how that almost came back to bite them. And that's something that I think it was Ryan Boyle even said on the broadcast, was he didn't really love how they handled the end of that game. And then once they hit the two, he was basically like, yep, that's exactly why I didn't like it. You just kept giving them possession after possession to try and get that goal to, get back in it and make it a one score game late and make you have to think about it a little bit. So I kind of agreed with him on that. I would have liked to have seen them, at least in one of those final few possessions, really try to go for it and not just run out the time, because worst case scenario, the exact thing that happened happens. They get a little bit of a run out on a cluster in the midfield, and Reese steps into a two and nails it. But again, I think that you can't just sit back and expect that you're going to win that game, because you look back to the game last season against the Water Dogs, they played it the exact same way, and the Water Dogs scored like 7 goals in about 5 minutes or whatever it was, and they ended up winning that game. So again, just wasn't really thrilled with their approach at the end of that game, but I'd still say that was a really solid performance by the Atlas overall. And I would also say that there was a lot of people, I think, kind of overreacting, especially about the defense after the Atlas game against the Cannons the previous week. And it's games like Sunday, which is why I wasn't totally panicking. Now, did they play great against the Cannons the previous week? Not necessarily, but it's games like Sunday where I'm just like, that is where they're going to win a championship, right? When guys like Adler are doing what we know he can do, right? And this defense is kind of living up to its billing, like I think they did on Sunday. That's where you're going to be able to win a championship this summer if you're the Atlas. And then there was a couple of quotes that I saw from the recap article that the PLL put out about the Atlas Water Dogs game from the respective beat writers. And I wanted to kind of give them credit for these quotes that they had in that article. From the Atlas beat writer, Lauren Marola, in that article, it says, quote, "We have to stop the two-pointers. That was our Achilles heel last week," Atlas coach and general manager Mike Pressler said at halftime of Sunday's game. New York allowed 3 two-pointers against the Boston Cannons in Fairfield. And yeah, again, like I said earlier this segment, I think that's one of the two biggest reasons why the Water Dogs had a chance there at the end in that game was A, Matt DeLuca making 17 saves in relief, and also the two-pointers that they were able to hit. They were, timely two-pointers, especially that one right there at the end. But you figure they had 11 points and 6 of those were off of two-pointers. So again, 2 weeks in a row, the two-pointers really killed the Atlas. But I think overall, outside of those two things, they had a pretty, I think, pretty good grasp on that game. And then from Water Dogs beat writer Wyatt Miller, a good friend of the show, Wyatt Miller had him on earlier this season on the show. It says, quote, "It was an ugly half of lacrosse, and the Dogs once again didn't show up when it mattered most. The lone bright spot was Matt DeLuca, who replaced Dylan Ward between the pipes after Ward went 0 for 5 on save opportunities in the first quarter. However, DeLuca's career day was all for naught as the Dogs lost their fourth one-score game of the season. They also had 4 power play opportunities and didn't capitalize on any of them." So yeah, exactly. He really hits on kind of the two things, or at least the one with DeLuca I talked about was kind of the two keys for them even having a chance there at the end in that game. And he's absolutely right. They, obviously lost another one goal game. That's something that they haven't really been able to get over the hump this season, and be able to make that one more play to be able to flip some of these games in their favor. And I think he puts it pretty perfectly. They essentially wasted the relief effort of Matt DeLuca, who did everything in his power to keep them in that game as long as he could. So my final thought is this regarding the Cannons and the Atlas clinching a spot in the playoffs this past weekend, is that it's, to me at least, it's the Atlas and the Cannons kind of 1 and 1A, like I said at the top of the segment. Then it's the Archers, who I think we kind of all forgot about this weekend because they're on a bye this past weekend, but they are still 4 and 2. They are atop the Western Conference standings. So it's the Atlas and Cannons 1 and 1A, then the Archers, then it's kind of like 50 feet of nothing, I would say, and then it's everybody else. Is kind of what it feels like right now in the PLL standings as it pertains to kind of championship aspirations. So coming up in segment 2 on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, like I said, we're going to touch quickly at the top of the segment about the Redwoods again and sort of the opportunity missed this past weekend out in California. But then I want to get into this kind of NLL versus PLL thing and get your thoughts on that coming up next on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome back. Segment 2 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Segment 1 talked about the Atlas and Cannons clinching a spot in the playoffs here in 2024. Segment 2, going to talk quickly about the Redwoods and then move in to this NLL versus PLL topic. I do have a pretty good quote that I want to get to with that when we get to it, so be prepared for that. But we heard top of the show, for those of you listening anywhere you get your podcasts, we heard top of the show the audio from Carolina Chaos head coach Andy Towers kind of giving his assessment of their game against the Redwoods, even though it ended up being a loss. And the way I would look at it is, as much as I think the Redwoods blew an opportunity this weekend, because I said it last week on the podcast, I felt like they were going to go 1 and 1 this weekend, which would move their record to 2 and 5. They did do that, but I said, hey, stranger things have happened. If they can somehow do this where they win both games, now all of a sudden you're sitting at 3 and 4. If you win both games by a couple goals, you improve your score differential, which wasn't looking so hot at the time. And now all of a sudden your season kind of does a 180, and we're talking about a whole different scenario. But They didn't do that. Obviously, they go 1-1. They're 2-5 on the year. I believe their score differential actually got worse because of the loss to the Whip Snakes in that game. So again, kind of an opportunity missed for them. But I feel like at the same time, it was kind of an opportunity missed for the Chaos as well, because the way I see it, if you win that game on Saturday, I would venture to guess that the Redwoods weren't going to come out on Sunday and beat the Whip Snakes. Obviously, we know that they didn't. But if you're the Chaos, you had an opportunity to go win that game and essentially end the Redwoods season right there, and essentially send them to an early rebuild, which as I saw on the podcast last week, a couple of people commented on that on last week's episode and basically said they would be all for that they would be in favor of the Redwoods kind of scrapping it this season and kind of getting a early head start on the rebuild this off season. So essentially, if you're the Redwoods, you had a chance to kind of flip your season this weekend, didn't do it. If you're the Chaos, you had a chance to end the Redwoods season, essentially, didn't do that either. So the Whipsnakes came in on Sunday and basically handled the job for you. But again, I just wanted to get that out. I just wanted to hit on that very quickly. What I want to do with this segment, though, is talk about this NLL versus PLL thing, because it's popped up on multiple occasions over the last couple of years, especially. I saw it pop up again this weekend, and I really want to know, why is this still a thing and how do we change that? Because I feel like it's kind of just become this weird rivalry on social media between the NLL and PLL fans. And I think for me personally, kind of from a local perspective here in Michigan, it kind of feels like the rivalry between fan bases with, Michigan, Michigan State, or Michigan, Ohio State, and how toxic that those rivalries have gotten on social media the last couple of years. So for me, it kind of compares to something like that. And again, I kind of want to know, why 6 years into the PLL is this still a thing? And how do we change that? Because for me, it's not something that I think is good for the sport, because we talk about grow the sport and grow the game and this and that all the time. And I think that when you have these two leagues that are successful at what they do, whether it's the NLL with box lacrosse or the PLL with the field game, they're both very good at what they do, and they're both very good at representing the game, and I think growing the game in different ways and things like that. And of course, things like visibility is a big part of that with their deals with ESPN and those kinds of things. But again, it's like, why does it have to be a this or that thing? Because I don't really think that it does. I think that if you want to be a fan of the NLL, cool, be a fan of the NLL. You want to be a fan of the PLL, cool, be a fan of the PLL. You want to be a fan of both, be a fan of both. Like, I don't get why there has to be like a this or that kind of viewpoint on it. And it was really funny because, as I mentioned top of the segment, the funny quote that I saw actually comes from Adam Levy on Twitter, the NLL writer, used Twitter AI to ask this very question and basically said which one was better. And the response that the AI gave was absolutely perfect. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it goes on for a couple paragraphs, but I pulled a couple of quotes from it, and I thought it was actually pretty funny. So Adam Levy allowed me to use that for this episode. It says, quote, "So which one is better? It's like asking if you prefer chocolate or vanilla. It's a matter of personal taste, my friend. If you're a traditionalist who loves the indoor game, the NLL might be your jam." Another quote later at the very end says, quote, "In the end, it's all about the love of the game. Whether you're cheering for the NLL or the PLL, just remember to have fun, support your favorite team." And then this is actually my favorite part of this quote. And then it says, "And maybe bring some nachos to the game." So yeah, I think as silly as this is, and it's almost comical in a way, I think it does kind of answer the question pretty well. It's not a this or a that thing. It's just whatever your preference is, whatever you want to be a fan of. And I know, even from a player perspective, you look across the PLL or you look across the NLL, whichever way you want to go with it, there's guys that play in both. I know a couple summers ago, people kind of joked that the Buffalo Bandits should be called the Buffalo Chaos because like half their roster also played for the Chaos. So again, it's like I don't think that there necessarily needs to be a this or that approach to it. And I mean, shoot, even Twitter AI, as goofy as it is, even Twitter AI kind of agrees with that. And again, I'll read that last quote again. It says, "In the end, it's all about the love of the game. Whether you're cheering for the NLL or the PLL, just remember to have fun, support your favorite team, and then, like I said, my favorite part of it, and maybe bring some nachos to the game." So yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes it right there. Is that it's just about growing the game. It doesn't have to be, which side does it better, or, who's been around longer, or this or that. It's just, hey, we're both trying to accomplish the same thing here. So let's just do that. Let's get to a couple comments here from the YouTube live chat. Again, doing this recording of the episode on YouTube live as well. Again, mentioned top of the show. You can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at Stevie Mac Media is the handle on both. Michael Ramirez, going back to segment one, talking the Atlas and Cannons, says both teams, Atlas and Cannons, have balance on both sides of the field. Advantage Atlas at faceoff. Pretty well said. I mean, they're absolutely deep up and down the field. Atlas, I mentioned last week in that episode, in kind of saying how I wasn't concerned about the Atlas after that loss to the Cannons. I mean, facts are facts. They had 10 guys in the All-Star game a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, they're definitely two teams that are stacked up and down their lineups. And then yeah, you do have to give the advantage to Atlas at the faceoff with Trevor Baptiste as always. From Global SEM, he says, "I don't get it personally." In reference to segment two here, talking NLL versus PLL, says, "I don't get it personally. Started watching pro lacrosse a couple of years ago after playing mainly field with some box experience. There's no need for a rivalry because they're both great." Yeah, and that's the exact point of this segment, I think, is I would 100% agree with that. There is absolutely no need for a kind of this or that kind of debate. And I do agree that while the NLL has been around longer, the PLL has done, and I don't think you can deny it, the PLL has done a lot of good since they've been around as well, just in the last 5.5, 6 years or so. So yeah, I do agree. It doesn't have to be a this or that kind of scenario. A couple more from Michael says, maybe more promotions during each other's seasons. See some NLL commercials during PLL title game and vice versa. Yeah, I do think that would definitely help. It does seem, although it seemed like more recently the NLL's been better about it on social media, but it seems like that sort of cross promotion has been a little bit taboo between the two leagues. Although, like I said, this weekend the NLL did do a little bit with that, especially promoting guys like Jeff Teat after he got the single season PLL points record and things like that. So there was some posting on their side. So I do think having it not be so taboo, kind of that cross promotion, I think would go a long way with that. And then he also says there's enough room for everyone to grow. Dinners all grow together. Yeah, and again, like I said, I think that the main objective when you talk about grow the game is that it's it's inclusive, right? You're trying to accomplish the same goal at the end of the day. So just focusing on ways like how he suggests with kind of that cross promotion idea, finding ways to do things like that, I think is going to go a long way, because if the two leagues kind of treat it as a us versus them or a this versus that kind of thing, then I think the fans have been and will treat it that way as well. Final segment of the show coming up, segment three here of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. We'll talk some Athletes Unlimited Pro Lacrosse on the other side. All right, welcome back. Final segment of the show, Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Starting out the show, we talked at Atlas and Cannons clinching the postseason this past weekend. Segment two touched very quickly on the Redwoods weekend this past weekend out in California and the sort of missed opportunity there, but really took a sort of a deep dive into this whole NLL versus PLL thing. Got a couple comments there in the mix. Final segment here of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Want to talk some Athletes Unlimited heading into week 3 of their season, a pretty short season in Athletes Unlimited. They only play 4 weeks, but they play 3 games each weekend. So it does kind of add up over time pretty quickly. So they're in week 3 upcoming out of 4. So kind of want to do a quick breakdown of that. The biggest mover on the individual leaderboard from this past weekend, if you're not familiar with Athletes Unlimited and the way that they do things, it's the best way I can describe it. And I described it this way on the show a couple of years ago, is it's basically like real life fantasy lacrosse. So just like in the PLL with fantasy lacrosse, you get points for goals, assists, ground balls, saves, whatever the case may be. And then on the flip side, you get points taken away for kind of the opposite, for, goals against, face off loss, turnovers, things like that. It kind of works that similar way, but it's like real life, real time fantasy lacrosse. So the biggest mover in the individual leaderboard was Sam Geyersbach, who moved up 25 spots on that individual leaderboard, had 8 goals and 1 assist over the weekend, and she'll play on Allie Kennedy's team this weekend. They also have 4 captains each week in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse. Again, if you're unfamiliar with the format, and week to week, the captains can change, although historically 2 of the 4 more often than not have been Sam Apuzzo and Taylor Moreno. Same case this week. There'll be 2 of the 4 captains again, and we'll break down each of the 4 rosters here in just a second. But again, biggest mover of the weekend last week was Sam Geyersbach, moved up 25 spots, I believe, into the 20th spot overall. And 8 out of the top 20, speaking of the top 20, 8 of those top 20 players currently are rookies. You have Emily Knowles is 5th. Izzy Skane, the sharpshooter out of Northwestern, has had a really nice start to her pro career, is 6th. Cassidy Weeks is 10th. Ellie Macera, another player that's started her pro career really well so far. Ellie Macera is 12th. Kendall Halpern is 13th. Madison Ahern out of Notre Dame is 14th. Cassidy Spillis is 16th. And Isabella Peterson, who had a really nice opening weekend 2 weeks ago in Athletes Unlimited, Isabella Peterson is 17th, again in that top 20. But to quickly kind of give a quick breakdown of each of the 4 rosters going into week 3, the captains were Sam Apuzzo, Taylor Moreno, Allie Kennedy, and Charlotte North. On Team Apuzzo, she gets the top spot this week in Athletes Unlimited, that number 1 spot in the rankings. She beat Taylor Moreno for the 2nd time already this season. And her team features Dempsey Arsenal, which really is no surprise. It seems like on an almost weekly basis, she ends up with, and I said this last week as well, she either ends up with one of or both Dempsey Arsenal and Kenzie Kent. So this week she gets Dempsey Arsenal back on her squad. She picks up Cassidy Weeks, who had 3 goals, 2 assists, 7 ground balls, and 3 caused turnovers in week 2. And this is her 2nd consecutive week on Apuzzo's team. She also has Maggie Hall, another really good rookie this year, who sits just outside that top 20 overall at number 21, had 5 goals, 3 assists last weekend. Madison Ahern, who we talked about just a moment ago, one of those other top rookies so far this season, had 4 goals and 3 assists last weekend for Apuzzo's team, and actually had a hat trick on Sunday in their win. And then Team Apuzzo's goalie, again, is going to be Katie Glynn. On Team Moreno, that's Taylor Moreno, the goalie. Another solid roster put together by Taylor Moreno. She has Marie McCool, who was actually one of the week 2 captains last week. Isabella Peterson, who had 8 goals and 3 assists back in week 2. Kendall Halpern, who again is number 13 overall on the individual leaderboard, one of those really good rookies this summer. A 2nd straight week for her on Team Moreno, had 7 ground balls and 6 caused turnovers last week. And then also has Maddie Burns on defense, the 35th overall player on the individual leaderboard. Is also another really solid rookie on the defensive end, was the Big Ten Defender of the Year, and this is her second straight week on Moreno's squad. Then you look at Allie Kennedy, not someone that, especially this season, has really been a captain, it seems like all too often. But again, that is the case with kind of how things work with Athletes Unlimited. So Kennedy, one of the four captains this week, I would say probably looking at it on paper, has one of the better offenses going into week 3 in Athletes Unlimited. Has Ali Mastriani, Sydney Black, another really good rookie in Sydney Black. Like, this rookie class this year in Athletes Unlimited has been absolutely ridiculous, and Sydney Black has been a part of that. And also has Sam Geyers back, who we talked about at the top of this segment. Her goalie, her main goalie at least, is going to be Britt Reed, who is another one of those players that on more than one occasion is a team captain herself. And then the defense in front of her is going to be absolutely unfair. Has Lizzie Colson, Cassidy Spillis, Meg Dowdy, and Courtney Taylor. So not only if you're an opposing offense this weekend, do you have to contend with scoring on Britt Reed, but the defense that's going to be lined up in front of her is going to absolutely put the clamps on, I think, over this next couple days, starting on Thursday night. And then the final team for week 3 is Charlotte North's team. The offense is going to feature, obviously, Charlotte. She also adds Ellie Macera and Kenzie Kent on that offense. Really have enjoyed watching Ellie Macera so far this summer. And then Livy Rosenzweig, who also made a big move up the leaderboard this weekend, moved up 20 spots over this past weekend, will take most of the draws for this team. She had 29 total in week 2 across their 3 games that they played over the weekend. So I think that's going to be a big piece to this offense for Charlotte North's team, is having somebody like Rosenzweig that can win you a lot of draws and just keep getting the ball to that offense. You kind of maybe draw a comparison to somebody like Trevor Baptiste in the PLL with the Atlas, his ability to essentially play make it, take it. I think that's maybe what Rosenzweig brings this to this team with Charlotte North's team. And then on defense, they have Sydney Scales and Kayla Wood as two of kind of their features on defense, with Kaylee Waters as their primary goalie. So that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, also streaming on YouTube Live. Again, Stevie Mack Media is my handle on both YouTube and Twitter. Make sure to follow on both of those, and you can also find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and more. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode on any of those channels, and I will talk to you guys later. All right, and we are out. So that was the first time I've ever done a recording of the show live. So for those of you guys that tuned in on here, a couple of you left some comments for me. I really appreciate that. Michael, I did see your follow up to that one about the autocorrect. I mean, it gets all of us. So no problems there. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed tuning in. Hopefully I can do more of these going forward, and hopefully we can get a few more people involved, so it kind of just grows from there. But thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I'll have this episode probably later out tonight.